But so starting again here on the hardware of the system, memory cards. What a what a novelty. I mean, they were already pretty big on the PlayStation, right? But when we got to the PS2, like just like these large memory cards that could hold tons of save data. I mean, instead of deleting your save file, like say we did on the Super Nintendo, because we need to make room for another playthrough, you could just save another one.
It
What?
it literally it sounds so stupid now, but on PlayStation 1, you could only have enough saves for one game. One
Oh
memory
yeah.
card was tied to one game. So having a memory card that could handle your entire library of games, that was insane. You would just take it to your friend's house and be like, "I've got all the characters, use my memory card." And then they would copy and paste it, and now everybody has all the characters.
Yeah.
That was such a game changer.
Sharing save files. I totally forgot to even think about that. You're right. We totally used to do that. Take your memory card. And that also like beat the whole like, oh, you have a PlayStation 2 and I have a PlayStation 2. Or if you have one, I can just bring my memory card and my controller instead of I need to bring my whole system just so we can play, or I need to bring the whole game cart. Just wow.
I mentioned this maybe way back in our first podcast ever, but the game that I think of the most when I think of that is Dragon Ball Z Budokai, where you would tie your character, like their specific power ups and their specific level ups. You would tie it to a character, put it on the memory card, and then you would just bring your memory card to somebody else who had the game, and you would fight their souped up character, and it would be like, okay, who do you have? And it's like, well, I've got Super Saiyan 5 Gogeta, whatever they were, and it's like, cool. Well, I've got 20 Cybermen that are going to destroy you because you didn't level up health. It's just awesome. It was so fun.
Oh my god. And that's probably one of the most notorious games in our house. We remember asking for the first Budokai for Christmas. That was the one game that we all asked for because it was always like, okay, you all should ask for one game that we'll give to you guys. And we'd be like, okay, what are we gonna get, guys? And we saw that advertisement for Budokai, and we were like, oh, that's what we want. And so the next day, we were like, Mom, where's Budokai? Like, we don't care about any of this other stuff. We just wanted Budokai. So we were all saying that, Budokai, Mom, Budokai. And Mom, literally, like, she's got 4 kids, and she was wrapping presents like a psychopath before the night before, she's like, and she had just misplaced it. And she was like, oh no. She was all freaked out. They went out the next day and bought it for us again because they thought they had lost it. And then it was like a couple days later, they found it. And we were like, okay, so just take this one back. So we could keep playing this one. But man, what a great fighting game series that came out of the Budokai games, man.
Yeah, I think for me, I've said this multiple times now, but I think just the idea of coming home from school and watching a cartoon, and then you watch the cartoon, maybe it's dinner time, whatever, and then you play a video game that is the cartoon. That just blew my mind. That was the coolest thing ever. Whether it was Dragon Ball Z or Gundam Wing or whatever, that was so cool to me in my little kid head. And Budokai was, I think, probably one of my favorite games of all time. So I'm sure that's a reason why it happened was because I've watched the show and then I go play the game.
I mean, at that point, Dragon Ball Z had taken over. At least we know of it at our high school. I mean, everybody would be talking about it on the bus, and then we'd all be riding home. It's like, dude, you got to watch the episode because people are going to want to talk about the episode on the bus the next day. Just racing home to watch that show, and that show was so influential at the time. And Toonami was real big. Japanese culture was really just starting to come in and punch us. Bam, bam.
Well, it sounds so crazy now because it's so embedded in our culture. I mean, we didn't have toys for that stuff back when we were kids. Being able to watch the show in English was already crazy enough. The fact that Cartoon Network and Toonami did that, especially like Naruto and stuff like that, we were bootlegging those from one guy, and it's like, okay, everybody pass the DVDs around, and then when it's your turn, you watch them in a stack of 3, and then you return them. We didn't have access to the stuff that kids have now, where Crunchyroll or even just going to a store and it's like, oh, there's anime toys on the shelf. We didn't have that. And so yeah, I mean, being able to play the video games, I think maybe that was our way of kind of showing our nerdiness, showing our fandom in whatever way we could.
Man, I hate to say this, but we did have access to Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z toys way early. So the Dragon Ball show had come out before Dragon Ball Z. And I remember watching it at my grandpa's house. And we were like, wow, this show's really cool. And it was right at the episodes in Dragon Ball where Goku and Co are going and infiltrating Emperor Pilaf's castle. So the penalty is pinball was the specific episode. And I remember that. And we watched it and we thought Yamcha was Goku's dad and Bulma was his mom because it just was absurd to us that a kid was going around by himself. We didn't know they were teenagers.
Yeah.
And so we finished watching that episode and we went to the store and there were Dragon Ball toys. I still have them. They're right there. They were crazy. They were really big and nicely made. And then when Dragon Ball Z was being released, we got these like little figurines that we played with incessantly. They were like locked in a shape, locked in a pose or whatever. And they were like as big as I don't know, they fit in your palm as an adult. They were really small. And we played with those all the time. And we had some import toys because you could get them from like EGM. But then there was like stores like PacSun, I think was one. And I think that was about the time that what the heck is I can't remember the name of that goth store. Hot Topic.
Hot Topic, yep.
Because you could go into those stores and get Japanese candy, and that's where we would buy Pocky and stuff. And we would do all that, and that was like late 2000s. So like 5, 6, 7. That was really starting to come out. But I mean, all through high school, you could get that stuff because Pokemon, Pokemon was really popular because we're not talking about the Game Boy. Yeah, but what is true is by the time we got to that age, did we want to buy action figures or did we want to spend our money on games? My youngest brother was the one buying the action figures. We were buying the games. So I think that's really probably where you were at too, where you were like, I'm just gonna buy the game. Why would I buy the toy? When are we going to play with the toy?
100%. It was also my parents going, I'm not going in that store. Yeah, they don't have those.
Yeah, true.
and so
yeah.
and so I go, okay, well, they don't have them.
Mom and Dad would never lie to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, we were talking about intros to systems when you first turned them on, and the PlayStation 2, like when you turn on, it makes that like shattering splash sound, which wasn't nearly as powerful as the original PlayStation 1 sound, but still very nostalgic for us. I just can't remember the first game that we got for the PlayStation 2, and the PlayStation 2's library is wide and deep.
I think was so crazy, a lot of us, I'm sure, did this, which is you bought the PlayStation 2 and you just played PlayStation 1 games on it because it was backwards compatible. So it was like, well, what game did you play? And it's like, well, I played Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. It's like, okay, well, what PlayStation 2 game did you get? And it's like, well, I played football, and
I'll kick us off here. I always want to veer off into RPGs and Final Fantasy X, right? Display the power of the system for me, please. Because for me, it started with Final Fantasy X. And the characters were just so much more, even than Final Fantasy IX. And Final Fantasy IX looked incredible, okay? The graphics in that game and the FMVs in that game were so cool. Of course, we called them cutscenes, and we were like, wow, this is really cool. I mean, fully voiced, looking like people. That intro was insane to Final Fantasy X. I was like, my mind was blown. You're look at Final Fantasy VII and then Final Fantasy X, and it is quite the jump.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the first time where I bought into the hype, and obviously it was getting all of these accolades in magazines and all of that stuff. That was the first time where I was like, okay, this is special. This is cool. Yeah, I just remember being blown away. I think any time that you play a game as a kid that takes that much of your time to beat, you've invested so much of yourself into it that it becomes a crucial part of your childhood. That obviously it's a good game. It's got amazing storytelling. It's got amazing voice acting and all of that stuff. But it's like you said, it was the spectacle of it. It was just so amazing to me that a game could look like that.
It was just wild. And there were so many RPGs on that system, and some had come from And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Final Fantasy X because while it was an incredible game and really revolutionized the genre some more, at least for us, the one game that I hold on to and I go back and I want to play it even more again is the Grandai 2 game. And I believe that was a Dreamcast game. And the Dreamcast had been like chopped up and shelved into the into the nethers, into all the different libraries. But man, did I love Grandai 2. And that game was fully voiced. It was crazy.
Yeah, that was one that I had not played, but you're exactly right. I felt like the Dreamcast kind of got split and sold to the highest bidder. All of the different games and systems and stuff like that or I guess I should say the series that were on those that kind of got lost to time because obviously Sega failed with I guess failed is the wrong word. The Dreamcast was an incredible system that nobody bought.
Unfortunately, yeah, because there was just so many titles on the Dreamcast that jumped around, and we're kind of jumping around genres here. But if we're going to talk about games that came from the Dreamcast that then were made into sequels, it would have to be Soul Calibur 2. I mean, one of the most influential games in our high school, probably. I mean, there was tournaments being fought over that game. It was incredible.
Yeah, I think we have multiple videos planned or podcasts, I should say, planned on topics about this game. I think this was the first time where you would talk to the game about somebody else. And we weren't being jerks or anything like that. It was just you had friend group circles and every circle had the best player from that circle. And I think what some of the best things that have ever happened from our childhood was circles coming together. This is our best, this is your best. Let's see them fight. And just the absolute hype feeling that you got getting a win or like you said we had multiple tournaments growing up as kids. We would go over to friends houses and spend entire weekends playing games. And I think Soul Calibur 2 was one of the very first ones where the more that you practiced the better you got. You genuinely became a better player the more you invested in it, as opposed to some of the earlier titles on PlayStation 1 where I think it was more about did the game crash or break while we were playing it.
Another series that we really got started on when we were playing PlayStation 2 is the Dynasty Warriors game. And it was Dynasty Warriors 2 specifically because Dynasty Warriors 1 was on the PlayStation and it was a fighting game. And this was the first time that we had. I don't know if there were other Muso games. I think that's what they call that style of game now. That game was crazy. Like Warrior Worth 1,000. I remember taking turns playing that game for hours with my younger brother. Me and him played that game constantly. It was so much fun. It was fun to I wished it was 2-player. We imagined it was 2-player nowadays, but it wasn't. We were constantly playing that. Oh my gosh.
Games of that style, I don't know how else to explain it other than that just fit in the psyche of what we were all about. It provided these really cool characters from history that you felt like you were learning lore about another culture. Obviously, that's not what it's doing. The point of the game is going to kill swaths of soldiers and your guy is unstoppable and all of that stuff. But it made you feel like that was the case. That I'm untouchable until the boss shows up, and then it's like, okay, finally somebody who's my equal, and then you lock in and you try to beat the boss. But holy cow, were those games fun.
If you think about it, it really does kind of capture that thing that we were talking about earlier. Like, hey, I've risen up. I'm the best in my group, and now we're gonna go and fight this other guy who's the best in their group. Like, just being able to push everybody aside and go straight for the boss, and then you're the one that beats him. And that's that's the game.
Whether it's Super Smash Brothers or Soul Calibur or anything like that, I think there's a very distinct gap between the best players and somebody who's just casually playing it there to have fun versus somebody who was we used to train. I remember training against the AI. You max the AI out all the way and go fight the AI opponent just to try to get a taste of what it would be like when you face somebody who's good. And it's exactly like you said. You just kind of beeline for the best player. It's like, I know you're the best. You know I'm the best. Let's do this. This is what the people are here to see.
If you want to teach gamers history, that's the way to do it. Because I know the Romancing Saga now. I don't know if it's the right one, but it's a version of it. Because I kept buying that game over and over until about the sixth one, I think, and then I was like, I think I've played enough. I'd like to pick up another one though. they keep going on sale on Steam, and I'm like, I want to buy that.
Yeah, I'm very guilty of the cyclical nature of wanting to play a game. I've beaten this game 1,000 times and I'm ready to move on, and then you kind of get that nostalgia bug and you're ready to go back.
Was there any sports games that you played on the PlayStation 2? Now I'm just kind of like trying to think of anything.
Yeah, for me, this is kind of where sports games took off. I think the PlayStation 1 era was fun, but it wasn't. I mean, we've all played sports games. I think the reality of it increased on the PlayStation 2. I really felt like obviously you had the simulation style games of Madden and things of that ilk, but I think what was more fun were the arcade style games. EA Big came out with NFL Street, NBA Street, those style of games, NFL Blitz, just styles of games where you're changing the rules of the game to make it more fun. I think that was really big on the PlayStation 2. SSX Tricky was on PlayStation 2. That was another really cool snowboarding game. We had kind of talked about Cool Borders before, but again, even that was compared to SSX Tricky. That seems grounded compared to doing like they were unbuckling their snowboard and doing tricks, flinging their board off and stuff. Yeah, I just feel like the PlayStation 2 was all about that arcade. We're gonna have a fast, quick, fun time. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, 4, just that style of. I think PlayStation 1, the word was cool. I think the word for PlayStation 2 was action, doing fun stuff really quick.
You had talked about SSX Tricky, and I think that was another Dreamcast game that came.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Another series that got its start on the PS2. I didn't. My youngest brother played these games, and I've since kind of been trying to play catch up on that series. But it's the Yakuza series. It started on the PlayStation 2, and it's very infamous. I think it was an action game, if I recall. I remember all the voice lines being really kind of like, "Hey, turn that down, Mom's right there." You know.
I never really play. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. That's one of those that have been added to my want to play list, the Yakuza games. Yeah, I never really played those. Obviously, they were very, very influential for your brother. I know he talks about those games all the time. I have quotes that are burned in my brain that he just repeats over and over again on those. But yeah, and that's the crazy thing of the PlayStation 2 was also it felt like whatever genre you were attracted to, there were games for that. If you were a really big sports gamer, there were a ton of options. If you were an RPG player, there were a ton of options. If you like action arcade, there were options for that. And you could really kind of narrow your focus and really focus in on the genre. You know, PlayStation 1 I think was more about the developer. We talked about Squaresoft and Square Enix. You know, whatever they made, we were going to buy. I think now on the PlayStation 2, it was more about, okay, what genre of game do you like? And I'll play those games.
Well, and I don't think it really had sunk into our little minds, at least for me and my brothers, that these were different like companies and they weren't all under this like the PlayStation's roof or something. So to us, Squaresoft was just like a team in Sony that worked for that system. So like branching off into the different companies and stuff, we were like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool.
I mean, honestly, I think so much of that era of gaming was based off of word of mouth. If you liked a game, you would tell your friends about it, and then they would go pick up the game and play it, and it'd be like, "Yeah, that was pretty cool." Or very rarely, it would be like, "Ah, that wasn't really for me." But you're right; it was almost this idea of like, if it's from this game, it can do no wrong. So you would just stick to the things that you knew.
Like Crash Bandicoot didn't really catch on for like or at least I don't know. In my opinion, this is just my own the way I was seeing it as a kid. Didn't really catch on as the mascot, and I'd picked up this game called Maximo. I don't remember the exact title, but it was like a platforming game. I was putting a lot of time playing that game, but I don't think I ever beat it. But those kind of like platforming games, it was still kind of in my head and playing those weird kind of platformers. I don't know if you played any platformers on the PlayStation 2.
Yeah, Maximo was definitely a very fun game. It kind of reminded me of Medieval, the PlayStation 1 game of kind of that same ilk. Yeah, Maximo, I think it was called like Ghosts and Glory or something like
Oh,
that. Maybe I'm misremembering
yep,
it.
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was something like that. But I remember playing that game a lot. It was very fun. You're right. There weren't. It was less about kind of these iconic characters. I think the PlayStation 1 was very heavily trying to beat back Mario and Donkey Kong, and Nintendo had these very iconic characters, and so Sony tried to counter it with characters of their own, with Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, and to a lesser extent like Lara Croft and all of that stuff. And PlayStation 2 at that point, they were so exploding so far ahead, they were just like, whatever, make whatever games you want. We don't need a mascot. We'll just keep making games.
I think that was like the big thing, was Sony just kind of embraced third party, and so there was just so many games. It's so hard to talk about every single game on the PlayStation 2, and even the ones that we liked, we're probably forgetting tons of them. Talking again about those, this is kind of I don't know if it was an obscure game, but I was like super into ninjas, right? And there was this weird platforming mascot game called I Ninja. And it was so satirical and goofy, but I don't know if it's one that I would go back and play. But I remember playing it a lot and trying to beat it because it was like, I am a ninja. I must do it.
That was definitely the time period when those certain things were cool. Ninjas, pirates, mechs, anything in that style of genre was just so incredibly cool. I don't know if this qualifies as kind of a platformer or not, but I remember the Devil May Cry series being very huge in our house, of just the absurdity of it. The topics of the game are so crazy and out there, and Dante as a character was such a crazy character. I remember that being a very fun game.
I mean, he was badass, and that character kind of influenced me as far as like wanting to be like that. And I think it was supposed to be like kind of a mockery of that kind of attitude. But I just thought he was so cool, like cowboy boots and a big old fucking red trench coat, and he's got this big badass sword and two guns, motherfucker, like a ebony and ivory. That was sick. I was like, man, this is the coolest game ever. Man, Devil May Cry 1 was incredible. And of course, 2 was not good. I don't know if you played 2,
Yeah.
but it was like the gameplay was there, but the story was not. And we're already talking about like Capcom and its cheesy writing, but 2 was, ouch, this is not good.
I very distinctly remember what happened with 2. It was one of those games that I rented. I had rented the game, and I couldn't get past the first level. I mean, it was so bad that I literally was just like, I'm going to return this. Like, I don't like it. But normally what I would do is you would rent a game and you would keep renting that same game over and over again until you beat it. And I remember Devil May Cry 2 was one that got returned very quickly.
poor Devil May Cry 2. I actually did kind of like that game, and I liked playing as that chick character. I thought she was kind of a cool answer to Dante that you got to play. 3 was really cool because it was supposed to be so tough. It just felt like it was just like hard because it was so much health. Of course, that was about the time I think the Xbox was out, or 360, I think. Or was it the Xbox? I don't freaking remember now.
Yeah, that would have been around the time of the original Xbox.
Original Xbox, that's what it was. Because I remember, because still in the vein of ninjas, and sorry, we're not talking about the Xbox really right now, but I remember saying, this isn't as good as Ninja Gaiden.
Right.
Like, yeah, it's supposed to be hard. I'll just go play Ninja Gaiden. That game's hard and balanced and fun. And this game was not as fun. But of course, I think that maybe Devil May Cry fans may be crying at me for saying that. That's kind of a hot take, maybe.
Well, I think it was, we talked about not having standardized controls. I think we also didn't really have standardized genres. So, nowadays you kind of say Dark Souls like or Dark Souls light, whatever you want to say. And so there was this kind of untapped potential of games that were incredibly difficult to play. Obviously, like we had talked about before, neither of us had ever been a part of the arcade scene or anything like that, where you put quarters in and, when you die, you lose your quarter. But I think there was certainly that appetite for games that were so challenging that it was almost like a reward when you beat it, to where you could come back to school and say, well, I beat Ninja Gaiden. It's no big deal, and you kind of get to, yeah.
People will come over and watch you play it, man. How did you beat that? Let me see that.
Well, exactly, yeah. Because then, what? It's like, well, wait.
Now watch this. You just got to do like this.
How did you get past? How did you get past the dogs? And it's like, well, that's actually a pretty common mistake. And you get to kind of gloat a little bit. But you're right. I think Devil May Cry kind of approached it from that. I mean, looking back on it, that was my jam. Like that style of game is exactly what I love. Kind of that cocky protagonist. He's kind of got a smarmy attitude. Like you said, there's kind of that super powerful girl character who's obviously better than the guy, and then just like kind of like that faux religious backdrop. I just love those themes. But yeah, I never really, Devil May Cry 4 and 5 I played but never really got into. Yeah, that's another one that I need to go back and kind of add to the playlist.
The ones that I really like are 1 and 4, and I have 5, and I still haven't got to play it yet. I've kind of taken a page out of my wife's book, which I think is actually pretty fun to do now that I've started doing it here and there. But she'll like listen to the soundtrack of a movie before we go see it. She's really musically inclined, much more so than I am. I've been listening to that soundtrack for Devil May Cry 5, and I'm like, this soundtrack slaps. Like, I can't wait to play it. And sometimes it enhances. Sometimes I think you can kind of spoil stuff for yourself depending on the game. But I don't feel that bad listening to Devil May Cry 5. I mean, the soundtrack in those games was so cool. You know, it's just like it just oozed coolness.
Yeah, there wasn't very many games back then that had kind of that electric guitar metal-ish, metal adjacent sound, just kind of that heavy music that pulled you into a game. A lot of it was very orchestra music or fun, light. It just the tone of that series is so fun and cool.
Talking about music and stuff, just aside, I've really gotten into metal as I've gotten older. I didn't know I liked that genre when I was a kid. I didn't know that that was like my jam. And I like pretty much everything, with hardly anything being crossed out of my genres that I like. So I've kind of got back and thought about that some more. And games like Mega Man X had a really strong metal sound because that's what was really popular in the 80s and early 90s. It was very popular music, but it had kind of fallen off into grunge and punk rock and stuff. So and really it just kind of scattered everybody's taste, which is fine. But you're right, like seeing metal kind of pop back up on the PlayStation 2, like here and there, was wild, right? Like even Final Fantasy X had that freaking like metal song in it. Like, what is this? Oh wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that I liked it. I just knew I liked those songs. And it wasn't until I had gotten to college that somebody had handed me a Lamb of God CD, and they were like, "Here, try this. You might like it." And I listened to it, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is incredible! Wow, I'm a metal person."
Yeah, in my formative years, the soundtrack that really stood out to me were the Tony Hawk Pro Skater soundtracks. I remember those being some of the most insane. Just playing a game, or I guess really it was kind of all of the EA games in that era. Obviously now we know it's because they were licensed under Sony, but I remember the early Maddens, early NCAA games. They all had really good music, and you're just kind of listening to it on the main menu or whatever. But you're right. I think having a soundtrack like that, it sets the tone for the entire game, whether it's like you said, heavy metal or grunge. The Tony Hawk's games, those were obviously much more ska and grunge and punk rock.
What was really cool about man, I saw an interview with Tony Hawk about this because he talked about how they had to pick the songs for those games, and he like basically went around and asked people, but really was picking out songs that people were listening to while they were skating. So this was a part of the scene, so you really were getting a piece of history there with some of these bands that you and I had probably never heard of. Of course, that also changed the face of our school, right? Everybody's going around trying to skateboard, which we talked about. Some of those iconic songs from that game were also songs that people were listening to while they were skating. It's like, what? It was a cool interview. I should dig that back out if I could find it. I'm trying to think of some other. Oh yeah, I was gonna say this earlier and I almost forgot again. There was this one game that was also another ninja game. Of course, we talked about Tenchu and Ninja Gaiden. There was so many ninja games at the time, but another one that was a really like visually stunning game, very difficult. I don't know if you played it. It was Shinobi, and maybe you would remember it once you saw his big red scarf.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And like when you would jump off the walls or do tricks, the scarf would like trail around, and it was so cool to see. Like, what an amazing effect that didn't really change through the whole game's experience, but was just like stunning the whole time. I mean, we're talking about Devil May Cry, and I just felt like it was like right there in that vein. Of course, it was like the same type of game, an action platformer type game, but it was so cool. Wow, that looks awesome. Just going back and like maybe watching some footage of that if you haven't seen it, it's stunning. But the game was really tough.
Yeah, I think they had a sequel where it was
Oh,
a girl, and she had a very similar scarf. Yeah, I think she had a pink suit, but she still had like the
okay.
real long scarf. But yeah, like those are the games that I would love to see get a remake and a remaster. Those kind of hidden gems. The 7.5 out of tens deserve it much more than I think the 10 out of tens, because you had said it in the last podcast, but 10 out of 10 people are gonna critique everything because it's like those were so iconic, and then you make one subtle change and it's like, oh, you've ruined it.
What is really cool about those 10 out of 10s, right? Like you change one bit of the soundtrack in the wrong way, people are just going to lose their minds like this isn't what I remember. And of course then you have the divide of people saying, well, this is for the new generation. Then you have the divide again saying, just go back and play the old one. And then the people who want the new one to be what they expected, they're like, but it was for me. Like, no, it's not. And then back and forth, and it's really toxic and terrible because they just missed the mark a little bit. And it's who knows for what reason. Maybe the people who made it was that was their original vision, and they didn't get to do it in the original game, but now they got to do it, and everybody's like, "This is shit."
I agree with you there. I think that's kind of the same sentiment that I have, which is obviously here more recently we've gotten the Final Fantasy VII remake and rebirth attached to it. But I think just that whole idea of remakes, I guess the one that stood out to me was the Silent Hill remakes and the backlash that came from those, where you're taking a game that objectively should be remade. The PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 have very degraded graphics compared to current or PlayStation 3 era. Even just bringing something up to HD and the quality that gets lost there, there was a huge backlash on those games. So yeah, I agree. I think there's an argument to be made for remake everything so that way it's available, and then on the other hand, it's kind of like don't mess anything, don't touch it.
You almost want them to touch it because you want it to be brought up to modern hardware. One of the limitations of these old games that people talk about constantly, and of course, we had to basically discover that this was the case because we didn't really understand it ourselves, was the whole like CRTV and then the transition into like HD and stuff, and how pixel graphics and graphics from those times really lost everything and how they were made. Like just seeing that like an image of Cloud Stripe's face in the pause menu versus like upscaled and it being wrong and being like, oh, why does it look bad? It didn't look like that. I swear it didn't look like that. It's because it didn't. You're like, oh, right. Forgot about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and like you said, I think we had the absolute worst hardware that you could have for playing games. We had the big bulky TVs that had the red, white, and yellow connectors. I can never remember if it's composite or component. The worst possible connection that you can have transferring image from one system to another. And a lot of times you weren't actually putting it through the TV. In my instance, I had to run through a VCR, and then the VCR input would come through the TV. So it's getting bandwidth issues twice. So yeah, a lot of times what we saw wasn't necessarily the artist's intention.
Incredible artist though, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Still a good.
Yeah, exactly. It still looked good.
But here's another game that I watched get played because it was bought by my youngest brother. He still talks about this, and they've done like a remake and stuff of it or brought it up. I'm not sure what they did exactly. He was very excited, and I was right there with him with his energy, but like I wasn't about to run out and buy it. But I liked watching him play it. It was Psychonauts. Did you ever play that game?
Oh yeah, yes. That's kind of another one of those hidden gems that we were talking about where I don't know that it was necessarily popular, but holy cow, man, you want to talk about just the storytelling in that game was so fun and cool.
And that's in line with kind of the other games that we were talking. I'm trying to think of games in the same genres to keep us on some kind of a topic. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I feel like
yeah.
it's really weird to think about how why we bought these games, because we would be like, okay, I really liked this action platformer. I want another one like it, and so then you would find it, and either in a magazine or someone would talk to you, or they would just hand you the game and you'd go home and play it, and you'd trade them something that you had been playing that you really liked. I don't know, it was just a really good game.
You kind of said the right word that triggered my brain, I guess. But the series that makes me think of that is, and I don't know if your household played these games, but the Sly Cooper Thievius Raccoonus.
We didn't get to play those. It was a shame because I'm pretty sure those are well loved series by people.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a very very cartoony take on a very serious game. Well, the game's not serious, but you're a thief. The fact that you're a cartoon character kind of lessens the blow a little bit. But oh my gosh, I remember those games being, again, just so fun to play. The stupid humor, the playground humor, the potty jokes, and all of that stuff. I remember those games being just so fun.
Man, I don't know when that game was made and when. Talking about like cartoon character, man, this is not the video. Oh, I guess it is the video for it because you didn't play 64, but there was a game that also had really high mature levels and themes, and I don't know how we got a hold of this game. Well, I do know how we got a hold of it. It's just I don't know why my dad was like cool with it, and it was Conker's Bad Fur Day. What an incredible title that game is on the 64, and
Yeah.
they did do a remake on the Xbox. I never got to play that, or maybe it was the Xbox 360. I don't remember. Live and Reloaded was what it was called. I always wanted to. The original game was so awesome. The voice acting was absolutely incredible, and I played through that game so many times. I mean, it was such an amazing game. It had like everything, and it had like zombies. It had it had Nazis. Like it was crazy. An incredible game. Lots of cuss words. I found it better that they bleep stuff out than when they. I think that I've seen some of the clips of the Live and Reloaded where they just like let them fly, but it was almost funnier that they would bleep.
Yeah, I think that's something about that just makes it more funny.
Hmm.
The idea that they're they're censoring the swear
Yeah,
words in game.
I love that game. That game was what an amazing ride. But I mean that I remember reading about it, which I'm not sure if all of it's true. Again, this is just like crap that we heard, and I've not gone back and researched it, and someone can correct me if they want to. But they had made this Conquer game on the Game Boy, right? And it was a game where you play the squirrel and you go around collecting nuts or whatever, and it was just a cute little game. And so they were in development of Conker's Bad Fur Day. Well, before it was Bad Fur Day, and they were like, "Oh, great, here comes another Banjo Kazooie game, all cutesy for kids. Who cares?" And Rare was like, "Nuh-uh, you want to see what we're gonna make actually?" So they made that. I don't know if that's true. It might just be a fun story that I held on to. Again, this is like from my childhood that I'm remembering this, and it's not really relevant for me to like go back and fact check it as an adult. I guess I could now. I mean, what? There could be a whole conversation there. It'd be fun to just play through that again.
We had kind of mentioned it when we were putting this list together before, but I think that two that we have to say are the Kingdom Hearts games. Just the idea of mashing Square and Disney together in the first game was mind blowing. The fact that they could make it happen, seeing Cloud Strife and standing next to,
Hades.
yeah, standing next to Hades, and it was insane, man. That blew my mind as a kid. I mean, to this day, I think that holds up as probably my second favorite game of all time. Just the insane story that happened.
I mean, that game was so mind blowing to think about. Because so in our household, fucking Squaresoft was like as big as Disney to us. We thought they were like equal. Of course, they probably weren't, but that's just what we thought. So, like you said, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna see Cloud next to Hades or Sephiroth. There was Squall. Squall was in
Yep.
that game. Oh, and it was crazy. And then they had their own character that they had made up that was kind of like a mash between a Square character and Mickey Mouse. But then the voice acting was all there. I just 100% thought that there wouldn't be any Disney voice actors in that game. And then bam, like a majority of the voice actors came and did their voices, reprised their voices. And then we got voices for characters that didn't have voices, like Cloud and Sephiroth and Squall,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was one of the very first times where I was completely immersed in that game. I think it reminded me very heavily of how I felt playing Final Fantasy VII. Just the idea of the story being so compelling. I felt like every single thing mattered. You would go to the different worlds, and obviously they were Disney movies that we had seen, so we already had. There was no reason to give any kind of a backstory. Obviously, you were playing through kind of a Sparks Notes version of that Disney movie, but it was like it made sense. It was filling in the gaps that were there that you didn't even know were there.
I mean, the other thing that was really incredible about that game was when you would go from one world to the next, your characters would change how they dressed and looked. Oh my god. That was so mind-blowing. Like I can't wait to see what Sora looks like when we go to Halloween Town.
Yeah, it
you
was
know?
really like they belonged there. Obviously, Donald and Goofy, there's plenty of memes on the internet about them, but just hearing them fight, hearing their like ambient sounds, it felt so real. It was just an amazing game.
Of course, the second one, by the time the second one had come out, I tried to play it multiple times and didn't ever get through it. And that was because I'd kind of fallen off the deep end into Warcraft. But we're not here to talk about that game. We're here to talk about the library. There's a massive library of the PlayStation 2. But this is a good stopping point for where we're at now. But again, I'm not done here. I think there's still some more topics to talk about here. What's something that you want to talk about in the next one, real quick?
Obviously we've been talking for almost 2 hours, and we've left off some of the heavy hitters. We've still got Resident Evil, still got Metal Gear
Mm-hmm.
Solid 2 and 3, um,
Mm-hmm.
God of War games. I think deserve to be talked about.
Of course.
Yeah, I feel like we've still got quite a few heavy hitters left to talk about.
All right. Well, then guess we'll see him next time, and we're gonna go ahead and jump right in.